The night weighed heavy on us as Ash and I made our way to the pier on the bayou. The clock on the car's dashboard read 11:45, and our headlights cut through a thick mist that seemed to rise from the very soul of the swamp. The car came to a stop on a gravelly patch near the entrance to the pier, and the engine's dying hum seemed to resonate with the very air around us. The place was alive with the sounds of unseen creatures, croaking and clicking in the darkness, while the pale moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy of twisted trees. The moss-draped landscape seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. Ash glanced over, noticing my discomfort. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah," I replied, my voice distant. "It's just that I feel like I've seen this place before." I reached for Gabby's leather-bound journal filled with her meticulous sketches. I suspected her drawings were more than art. They were a visual roadmap, a guide to her thoughts and experiences. As I flipped through the pages, my heart began to pound. There it was, a sketch that matched the pier perfectly, down to the very gnarls in the wood. "Ash, look at this," I said, showing him the sketch. His eyes widened, and he reached for the notebook, his fingers lingering on the page. "It's exactly the same," he muttered. I looked at my watch and saw that it was a couple minutes before midnight. We stepped out of the car, every instinct screaming at me that something wasn't right. The bayou was ancient and untouched, and it held secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The path to the pier was overgrown and slick with moss, our footsteps muted by the damp earth. The creaking of the wooden pier under our weight seemed to echo into eternity, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. My skin prickled with the sensation of unseen eyes, following our every move. The mist swirled and danced around us, and for a split second, in the distance, I thought I saw something, a figure, twisted and grotesque. It loomed over the marsh, a shadow within shadows, gone as quickly as it appeared. I stumbled, a cold chill racing down my spine, my breath catching in my throat. "Ash," I whispered, my voice cracking. He turned, concern in his eyes. "What's wrong? Did you see that?" I asked, my eyes wide, scanning the darkness where the figure had been. "See what?" he asked, following my gaze, his hand resting on the gun at his side. I'm not sure." My words felt hollow, and the terror was replaced with a gnawing doubt. Before I could think further, the sound of footsteps reached our ears. They were soft, but deliberate, coming closer, breaking through the eerie silence of the night. We turned, weapons drawn, only to find Lucien emerging from the shadows, his face pale and drawn. His eyes held a haunted look, and his hands trembled as he approached. "Lucien!" I snapped, holstering my pistol. "What the hell? You could have gotten yourself shot!" "I didn't think you'd actually come," he stammered, surprise and relief in his voice. "Of course we came," Ash replied, his tone more measured. "You said you know something about Gabby. Can we talk in the car?" Lucien's eyes darted around the swamp, his voice trembling. "I don't want to be overheard." "In the car?" I scoffed, though the prickle on my skin told me he might be onto something. "Who's going to overhear us here?" "Please," he begged, his face pale. "I don't know who or what, but something doesn't feel right. I think we're being watched." The words hung in the air, echoing my own uneasy feelings. Reluctantly, I nodded. "Fine. Come on." We scrambled into the car, and the door shut with a reassuring thud, though the sense of unease lingered. Once inside, I could see Lucien's fear was genuine, and it matched the uneasy feeling I'd been experiencing. I tried to be patient, but my mind was racing. "Okay, Lucien, spill it. What's going on?" He looked out the window, his eyes lost in the darkness. "Gabby and we've been seeing each other." "Seeing each other?" I pressed, not satisfied with his vague answer. What does that mean? Were you dating? Yeah, dating, Lucien admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Dating, and more than that. But we didn't tell her mom, didn't tell anyone really. And why's that? I asked, my patience wearing thin. The suspense was getting to me, and Lucien's reluctance to divulge was driving me crazy. Lucien started, tears welling in his eyes. I just can't. Ash, ever the empath, reached over and placed a reassuring hand on Lucien's shoulder. It's okay, bud, he said gently. We're here to help. We need to understand everything to find Gabby. You can trust us. I caught the meaningful look Ash shot my way and realized I needed to dial back my frustration. With a deep breath, I forced a smile and tried to soften my voice. Lucien, we know this is hard for you, but we need to know what happened so we can help. Please just tell us everything. Lucien looked between Ash and me, his fear giving way to a hesitant trust. His voice broke as he began to speak. We didn't tell her mom because we were having sex. We were in love. But her maman would never understand. I felt my eyebrows shoot up, surprised by the admission, but still sensing there was more to the story. Lucien looked as though he were about to be sick. And then? I pressed, trying to keep my voice gentle but firm. And then, Gabby told me she was pregnant, Lucien said, the words coming out in a rush. The car went silent. The words hung in the air like a bombshell, and I felt the weight of them settle over us. Pregnant. That changed everything. Pregnant? Ash finally said, breaking the silence. Are you sure? Yeah, Lucien whispered, tears streaming down his face. She showed me the pregnancy test. She was scared and didn't know what to do. We didn't know what to do. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to come together, and a chilling picture was forming. A young girl, pregnant, her future uncertain, her mother likely to react with anger and disappointment. I wanted to yell at Lucien and scold him for his reckless behavior, but felt a sudden pang of sympathy for him. He was just a kid, thrown into an impossible situation, and now the girl he loved was missing. I forced myself to push aside my impatience and spoke to him with genuine compassion. I know this is hard, I said softly, but we need to know everything. Did Gabby say anything else? Did she have any plans? Did she talk to anyone else about the pregnancy? Lucien wiped his tears with the back of his hand, struggling to get the words out. I wanted to keep the baby, he confessed, his voice filled with regret and pain. I thought we could make it work. But Gabby didn't see it that way. My heart ached for the young man, who was clearly torn by the memory. I shared a glance with Ash, who gave a subtle nod, encouraging me to press on. What do you mean, Cher? I asked gently, keeping my voice calm. What did Gabby want? She wanted an abortion, he finally whispered, the words barely escaping his lips. She was so scared, and she felt like we had no other choice, but she didn't know how. A heavy silence filled the car, the weight of Lucien's revelation settling over us. The implications were enormous. In rural Louisiana, access to abortion was nearly impossible. Strict laws, combined with social stigma, made it a daunting challenge for anyone, let alone a frightened young girl. Did she tell anyone else? I asked, my mind racing with the possibilities. Lucien shook his head. No, not at first. We kept it between us, but then something happened. What? Ash asked, his voice sharp, sensing that we were getting closer to something significant. There was this stranger, Lucien continued, his voice trembling. He came to the bar a couple weeks before Gabby disappeared. An out-of-towner, but he seemed familiar with the region, spoke fluent French. Well-dressed, tipped well, but there was something about him. What do you mean? I asked, feeling a chill creep up my spine. Lucien's face grew more animated as he recalled the mysterious stranger, the fear in his eyes replaced by something akin to fascination. He had this, I don't know how to describe it, this animal magnetism. He just had a way about him. He could charm anyone, really, but with Gabby, it was different. It was like he had her under a spell. Lucien hesitated for a moment, then continued. He liked her fiddling, sat there all night listening to her play. But the way he looked at her, it was like he could see right through her. He told her he could help her with her situation. I shared a quick glance with Ash, who looked equally alarmed. Did you hear anything else? Did this stranger give a name? I asked, hoping for more clues. Lucien frowned, deep in thought. I couldn't pick up much else, but he did mention a name, he finally said. Lupin. Lupin? Asher echoed. It's French for wolf-like, I explained, biting my lip. It must be an alias, Ash suggested. Why didn't Remy mention a Lupin when we spoke? I asked. His son was sick and wasn't working that day, Lucien responded. Did you talk to Gabby about this Lupin? I asked, keeping my gaze fixed on Lucien. Lucien's face went ashen, and he shook his head. I tried to ask her, but she shut me down. She just said that she was taking care of it, that it was something she had to do on her own. She wouldn't tell me anything else. The silence in the car was heavy, the revelation hanging over us like a shadow. I had more questions than answers. What had Lupin really wanted? What had Gabby agreed to? Do you remember what he looked like? I asked, pulling out my notepad to take down his description. He was tall, maybe around 6 feet, and had long, dark, shaggy hair. He had a beard, too, and his eyes were the color of the swamp. An unreal green, Lucien recalled, his voice barely above a whisper. I jotted down Lucien's description. My mind was already full of the implications of what he'd told us. The mention of the mysterious stranger started to make everything click into place. Gabby's odd behavior in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, her deleting her search history, the money she had stashed away, the unnerving sketch of something growing inside of her. It was all beginning to form a clear but disturbing picture. Once we finished our questioning, we gave Lucien a ride home. His house was small and modest, located on the outskirts of town. It was clear that his family didn't have much, but the home was well taken care of. As we pulled up to his house, Lucien leaned forward in the back seat. I want to help find Gabby. Please, let me help, he pleaded, his eyes brimming with determination. I appreciated his sentiment, but it was clear that he was in over his head. You've already helped a lot, I assured him, handing him my card. We'll handle it from here. If you think of anything else, don't hesitate to call. Lucien pursed his lip, nervously fidgeting in his seat. Are you going to tell Gabby's maman? He asked timidly. I sighed. As much as I wanted to protect him from the fallout, we had a duty to the truth. Yes, Lucien, we have to, I replied, trying to keep my tone gentle. She has the right to know. He nodded, looking out at his small, humble home. The dim porch light illuminated the weary sadness on his face. I understand, he said quietly. But listen, I told him, meeting his gaze. We're going to do everything we can to find Gabby, and you have my word that we'll keep you updated if anything comes up. A small, grateful smile creeped onto his face. Thanks, sir, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. For everything. I nodded in acknowledgement, watching as Lucien got out of the car and walked towards his home. I watched him disappear into the dim light, his silhouette merging with the shadows. A sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air. My mind couldn't help but wander into dark territory. The prospect of a kidnapping or even human trafficking reared its ugly head, casting a chilling shadow over the unfolding mystery. Whoever Lupin was, he was now our prime suspect. I looked out the window, my eyes drawn to the shadowy swamp, a place filled with secrets and mysteries. The bayou had seen much over the years, and it felt as though it were watching us now, waiting to see what we would do next. The lights at Teresa's were still on when we pulled up, the house seeming smaller and more vulnerable than before. The thought of delivering this blow to her made my stomach churn. With one last glance at Asher, I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my boots. Therese had told us to update her with any news we had as soon as we found out, even if it was in the middle of the night. The door creaked open before we even had a chance to knock, Therese's anxious face peering out at us. "Did y'all find anything?" she asked immediately, her voice filled with a desperate hope that hurt to witness. We told her everything, from Gabby's secret relationship with Lucien to the unexpected pregnancy and the mysterious stranger called Lupin. The reaction was heartrending. She looked as though we had physically hit her, her hand flying to her chest as her eyes welled up with tears. "My baby girl," she whispered, her voice breaking. After explaining everything to Therese, the air grew thick with sorrow and unease. Ash suggested, "Maybe we should rent a motel nearby to carry on our investigation. It'll be less intrusive for you." But Therese, wiping her eyes, adamantly refused. "No, I won't hear of it. You're doing so much for Gabby. The least you can do is stay here." We tried to object, but she was insistent, even going as far as offering her own bed. "You both need a proper rest," she said with a shaky voice. "We can't take your bed, Therese," I replied firmly. In the end, we compromised. The couch, though not the coziest option, became our resting place for the night. The day had been long and filled with twists, and as the night deepened, the promise of tomorrow's search loomed. Morning sunlight filtered through the worn-out drapes of the living room. The night before was a blur of thoughts, theories, and restlessness. As I sipped the coffee Therese had kindly made, I couldn't help but replay Remy's words in my head. Young people going missing in the bayou. Ash had already set up a temporary workstation on Therese's dining table, sorting through newspaper clippings, police reports, and online forums. "We should start by pulling up missing person records," I suggested, joining him. We started sifting through the mountain of data available on missing persons from the past decade in the Acadiana region. Ash's fingers flew over the laptop's keys, while I pored over the physical files, connecting dots and drawing lines between cases. Soon, the table was filled with stacks of printed reports and photographs, a grim mosaic of young women who had seemingly vanished into the thick miasma of the bayous. We created a timeline of disappearances. It was a gruesome puzzle, but one that was starting to make sense. Our research unearthed similar stories, from Evangeline to Acadia Parish. There was an undeniable pattern. Young women in desperate straits, disappearing without a trace, only to be found, if at all, weeks or months later, their remains too mutilated to provide any substantial forensic evidence. One of the earliest cases we stumbled upon was that of a young woman named Leila Deschamps from Lafayette, who disappeared in 2012. She was a pregnant teen, abandoned by her family and seeking refuge wherever she could. Her diary was found on the banks of the Bayou Teche, with its pages soaked, the ink smeared, and her hopes and fears nearly washed away. 2 weeks after her disappearance, a fisherman came upon her body, drifting among the water hyacinths, her skin marred beyond recognition by the teeth and claws of scavengers. Then there was the heart-wrenching 2015 case of Daisy Fontenot, a 20-year-old sex worker trying to make enough money to escape the clutches of her abusive boyfriend. Her last known location was on the outskirts of St. Landry Parish. She had called her younger sister, telling her about a new client who seemed oddly familiar. That was the last anyone heard from her. 3 weeks later, a group of children playing near the bayou stumbled upon a washed-out purse with Daisy's ID. Her remains were found deeper in the marshes, making it impossible for the coroners to piece together the events leading up to her death. Sophie Broussard's case from 2 years later was one of the most mysterious. A 16-year-old runaway from Evangeline Parish, Sophie was always on the move, relying on the kindness of strangers. Locals in the town of Ville-Platte remember seeing her hitchhiking on a cold evening, her breath forming tiny clouds as she waved down passing cars. Not long after, pieces of her clothing were found strung up in the trees, almost ritualistically. Her body, when found, was so disfigured by wildlife that her identity was confirmed only through dental records. Our work stretched for hours, the silent hum of the overhead fan providing the only semblance of background noise in Therese's dining room. The more we unearthed, the more chilling the scenario became. I could feel the weight of every young woman's story pressing on us, heavy and demanding to be told. The pieces began to come together, each one forming a pattern that became harder to ignore. As Ash and I cross-referenced the cases, their similarities started to jump out at us. Not only were all these women marginalized and vulnerable, but they all vanished in the same geographical region. While some bodies were found, others remained undiscovered, their stories written off as tragic tales of individuals who got lost or met with unfortunate accidents. "Look at this," Ash murmured, pulling up a digital map and pinning locations of each disappearance. A chilling formation appeared, a rough circle encompassing the bayous, with its center oddly barren of any known disappearances. "We've been so focused on the individual stories, the heartbreak. We didn't see the bigger picture," he said, the gravity of our discovery evident in his eyes. I spread out photographs of the victims, the lost souls looking back at us. They had been taken from this world too soon, their dreams and aspirations cruelly snuffed out. "Do you realize what this means, Ash?" I whispered, though I was sure he had come to the same disturbing conclusion. "We have an active serial killer," he responded, voice filled with dread. The words serial killer hung heavy in the air, a suffocating weight. One who has been operating under the radar for at least a decade. I felt a chill down my spine. The weight of the realization was overwhelming. Not just the deaths, but the sheer number of them. 24 victims, I whispered, the magnitude of it hitting me. At least. As we continued to delve into the cases, we saw a progression, an evolution in his modus operandi. It began subtly. The early victims, like Lila, were found in areas where they could be easily discovered, almost as if the killer was still hesitant, still unsure. As the years progressed, the locations of the dumped remains became more secluded, hidden deeper in the swamps, making them harder to find and connect. But what was even more disturbing was his increasing audacity. He began to leave tokens that seemed utterly random, a locket, a bracelet, a scrap of fabric. It was as though he was intentionally leaving us breadcrumbs. "This is sick," Ash muttered, frustration evident in his voice. "He's toying with the families and the police." I nodded, pulling out a file that had caught my eye earlier. It was the case of Elise Martel, a college student from Lafayette who had vanished 6 months before Gabby. The circumstances were eerily similar. Elise, like Gabby, was in the vulnerable phase of her life, struggling to find her footing after a tumultuous relationship and falling into drug abuse. Her last known contact was a voicemail sent to her mother's cell phone, which was received 2 days after she was reported missing. In the distorted, static-filled message, Elise's voice could be faintly heard, her tone hauntingly calm. "Mom, remember the song you used to sing to me when I was scared? I need to hear it now." It sent chills down my spine. There was a pregnant pause at the end, a breath, perhaps a whisper, but it was too garbled to make out any clear words. It was as if the killer had allowed, perhaps even forced, Elise to send this message, playing with the emotions of her loved ones, leaving them with the chilling memory of her voice. Ash played the recording again, adjusting the audio settings on his laptop. The chilling message replayed, and this time in the background, he isolated a soft, mocking laughter. The killer was there, listening, savoring the pain he was inflicting. "It's a power trip for him," I murmured. "He gets a thrill out of letting them call home, knowing the agony it causes. He's not just satisfied with taking their lives. He wants to leave a lasting scar on the families too." As the hours dragged on, a nagging feeling gnawed at the back of my mind. We were missing something. It was like a puzzle piece that was right in front of us but remained unnoticed. I flipped through the files, each face a testament to the heinous acts of this twisted individual. Then my eyes settled on Leila Deschamps' case once again. I pulled out the photographs from her file, and one in particular made me pause. A tarnished silver locket, partially open, resting beside her diary on the banks of the Bayou Teche. My heart raced. The design on the locket, a delicate engraving of a willow tree, was achingly familiar. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. I'd seen this locket before. Breathing heavily, the room seemed to close in on me. A flood of memories washed over me. The sense of foreboding and dread that had been whispering at the edges of my consciousness since we began this investigation threatened to drown me. Ash noticed my distress. "Rain, what is it?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes. Without uttering a word, I bolted from the room, the shock in Asher's voice as he called out to me. Outside, the night air hit my face, but it did little to quench the growing panic. I fumbled for my keys and unlocked the SUV, rummaging through the boxes of cold cases I had brought along. I needed to confirm what I was thinking, what I was feeling. With trembling hands, I pulled out a dusty, worn-out folder labeled Claire Lejeune. This was a case that had haunted my dreams and waking moments for over 10 years. Claire was a vivacious 16-year-old from my hometown of Pier. The memories of her disappearance were etched into my mind, her face forever frozen in time as the girl with bright eyes and a future full of potential. I had been a rookie cop back then, fresh out of the academy. Claire's case was my introduction to the harsh realities of the job. Her body was found weeks after her disappearance, lying among the dense foliage of the bayou, horribly mauled by scavengers. The official report suggested she might have run away and met with a tragic accident. But I never believed that story. Something felt off. Something was amiss. The faded notes, written in my then neat handwriting, were a testimony to the countless hours I had spent on the case. It was an obsession of mine, long before I had become a jaded detective, long before the weight of the world had fully settled on my shoulders. Within the detailed notes, my scribblings became more erratic, showcasing the frustration and helplessness I felt during the investigation. I had documented every lead, no matter how small, and every interview with her friends and family, but the ones that stood out the most were the forensic reports. I flipped to the report from the day her remains were discovered. There, in the meticulous handwriting of the coroner, was a note about fur found intertwined with her clothes and tangled in her hair. Forensic analysis had determined it to be wolf fur. The town was no stranger to wildlife, but wolves were rare, making the finding unusual. Adjacent to the coroner's note was a hastily sketched map indicating where Claire's belongings were discovered. Her backpack was found just a short distance away from her body, lying half submerged in a muddy puddle, the contents strewn around it. But the most eerie discovery was a waterlogged Polaroid that had been carefully stored in a waterproof pouch. It was believed to be the last photo taken of Claire. I pulled the reproduction of the photo from the folder, the image still capable of turning my veins ice-old. Claire stood alone in the bayou, her expression a stark contrast to the beautiful, natural backdrop. Her once radiant eyes were now wide with fear, the bright gray hue dulled by the horror, pleading for help. Her disheveled brunette hair was wild and tangled, as though she had been running or struggling. Her mouth was slightly agape, lips quivering, as if she had been screaming moments before the picture was taken. But what truly added a layer of unease was the shadow cast behind her, elongated and distorted, a sinister presence lurking just out of frame. The shape was undoubtedly that of a person, presumably the one who had taken the picture, her killer. The haunting photograph left me breathless, but as I looked closer, I recalled more discrepancies that made my heart race faster. Claire was dressed in a simple black dress, its delicate lace contrasting sharply against the oppressive backdrop of the Bayou. But according to testimonies from her family, Claire had never owned a dress like that. Why was she wearing it, and where had it come from? However, the most important detail was the absence of the locket around her neck, a treasured gift from her sister. Claire never took it off. It was her safety net, her connection to family, even when she was away from them. With a shaky hand, I compared the photo of Claire's locket, which had been documented in her belongings list, to the photo of Lila's locket. It was a match. The intricate design of the willow tree, the small dent on the bottom right, everything. This wasn't just a coincidence. Claire Lejeune was one of Lupin's earliest victims. Suddenly, all those seemingly random trinkets made sense. I realized they all belonged to previous victims. These were trophies, displayed with the new victims as a taunt, a cruel game he played with investigators. My chest tightened, and the world seemed to blur around me. Realization crashed down in waves as the past and present collided. The file in my hand felt heavy, the weight of Claire's memory bearing down on me. My breaths came in short, ragged bursts as the looming feeling of dread threatened to consume me. My senses tingled with unease. I felt a palpable sensation of being observed. With the case files scattered around me, I scrambled to turn on the flashlight I always kept in the glove compartment. The strong beam cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows over the thick, swampy trees and water's edge. The bayou at night was a symphony of crickets, frogs, and the occasional splash, but it had fallen eerily silent. I slowly moved the beam, methodically scanning the area, trying to spot anything out of place. Then, my light caught a figure. At the edge of the bayou, someone, appeared to be crouched down, moving unnaturally on all fours. It looked like a man, but the way he moved was more animal than human. He was draped in what appeared to be a large fur coat, which seemed to merge and camouflage with the surrounding vegetation. But the most chilling sight were the eyes. They gleamed, reflecting my flashlight beam in an almost predatory manner. For a brief moment, our gazes locked, and the very atmosphere seemed to freeze. "Lupin!" I shouted, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. Instead of responding, the figure let out a guttural sound, somewhere between a growl and a laugh. And then, with a speed that was deeply unsettling, he turned and bolted further into the bayou. Without thinking, I drew my pistol from its holster and sprinted after him. The dense undergrowth scratched against my skin as I pushed through, my boots sinking into the mud with each step. The flashlight in my left hand bounced wildly, creating an ever-shifting play of light and shadow ahead. The figure remained just out of reach, a fleeting shadow darting between trees. His movements were so erratic that it felt like chasing a phantom. With every rustle, splash, or snap of a twig, my heart raced faster, adrenaline pumping through my veins. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath me. I tumbled down, splashing into the stagnant waters of the bayou. I tried to regain my footing, but the sludgy water and mud hindered my movement. My pistol slipped from my grasp, disappearing into the murk. My flashlight, however, remained in my hand, its beam now pointed upwards, casting the trees in a ghostly light. The beam skimmed the murky water, revealing what appeared to be a human form floating on the surface. Panic welled up inside me, the water around me growing colder, and for a split second, I was convinced it was Gabby's lifeless body. But as the light steadied, the grim reality took a different form. Instead of human flesh, I saw the unmistakable scaly hide of an alligator, its underbelly exposed to the night. The creature had been savagely disemboweled, its underbelly torn open, spilling its viscera into the murky waters. The light from my flashlight danced erratically as I tried to gain control over my racing heart. The grotesque sight of the alligator had already shaken me, but what truly stole my breath was the hint of something caught in its mangled jaws. Reaching forward cautiously, my fingers brushed against a soft, silken strand. With trembling hands, I pulled out a lock of chestnut hair, unmistakably Gabby's, bound tightly with a taut violin string. The metallic scent of blood mingled with the musty odor of the bayou, clouding my senses. Lost in my thoughts, I barely registered the firm grip on my arm until I was yanked upwards. For a split second, panic seized me, and my mind imagined the worst. However, the familiar, concerned face of Ash greeted me. He hauled me out of the muck, his eyes wide with a mix of relief and alarm. "Raine, what the hell were you thinking, running off like that?" His voice was tense, but his grip was steady. But before I could respond, an eerie silence enveloped the bayou, broken only by the soft, chilling sobs of Therese, who had arrived on the scene. Her eyes widened in terror as she took in the grisly scene before her. Me, covered head to toe in thick mud and blood, clutching a strand of what she instantly recognized as her daughter's hair. Her face turned deathly pale, eyes bulging in a silent scream. "Mon Dieu, je vous en supplie, non!" "My God, I beg you, no!" she murmured, voice barely above a whisper, disbelief etched into every word. The quiet bayou was pierced by a heartbreaking scream as she crumpled to the ground, the weight of the evidence in my hand hitting her like a tidal wave. Time seemed to stretch, and everything became a disorienting haze. The world around me muffled, and the weight of the moment bore down on me, making it hard to breathe. My vision tunneled, focusing solely on Therese's tear-streaked face. I could distantly hear her anguished sobs, broken up by desperate prayers in French, each word heavy with pain. Ash quickly moved to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, trying to offer solace in a situation that defied understanding. A heavy dread settled in my gut. Was Gabby still alive, or had I just discovered the last remnant of her existence?